Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're going to break down a couple of top prospects that could potentially make their impact at the major league level this year for the Philadelphia Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air at 97.5 The Fanatic here doing Philly Sports Talk Radio for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure that if you're consuming this in podcast form, you're rating and reviewing wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching us on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, go to the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. It will get you notifications when new episodes are posted. It's free. It's easy. It takes like 2 seconds to do. It's a great way to help us out as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Big weekend in the NFL. The Birds play tomorrow. Go Birds. Of course, check out our friends on Locked On Eagles. Big game in the NFC Championship game, so we're pulling for them. But we've got some stuff to get into on today's episode that I think will be really interesting for where we're at in the offseason. First, I'm going to take a look at some of the top prospects for the Philadelphia Phillies, and we're going to look at some names that could potentially make an impact at the major league level this year. Yeah, there are a couple of guys that could be Philadelphia Phillies at the major league level. We're also going to look at a surprise name that has popped up kind of in the mix for pitching depth for the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't know how realistic it is, but he's an interesting enough name to talk about. We're going to get into that in the middle segment. And then I'm going to take a look at the first month of the season schedule. I know it's looking way ahead for what it feels right now like in January, but as the calendar gets ready to flip to February, we're going to start looking at the schedule and spring training. Pitchers and catchers will report. So it's right around the corner, folks. So we're going to get into all of that on today's episode. But where I want to start is this look at these prospects, right? Because the Phillies haven't really had a major amount of prospects come up and make huge differences for the team lately. Now, Alec Bohm was a prospect that came up. Bryson Stott was a prospect that came up. Yohan Rojas, a prospect that came up through the Philadelphia Phillies system. But those guys have now been up for a couple years. And we haven't really had this infusion of youth into the team like crazy in big, important spots lately. So the question is, who are those next guys? And that's natural with a contending team. A contending team, you don't often see, hey, we're bringing up this 20-year-old that's the next big thing that's going to be a major player on this team. That's what rebuilding teams do, because rebuilding teams are focused on finding the next guy. The Phillies already have a bunch of guys, but that doesn't mean that there won't be a couple young players that could make their impact at the major league level this year. So let's take a look at some of the Phillies' top prospects. The first name that comes to mind, undoubtedly, is Andrew Painter. He should be first and foremost on the mind of anybody having a prospect discussion when it comes to the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm telling you guys, he is going to make an impact, if not a major impact, on the Philadelphia Phillies 2025 season. He could be the X factor, right? Everyone's talking about the Phillies running it back and not making enough changes and this, that, and the other thing. And I know pitchers only throw once every 5 days, starting pitchers do, but Andrew Painter is one of those next level X factor prospects that could, if he projects to the major league level the way that a lot of scouts are saying he's going to, be a major piece for the Phillies in 2025. Now, he's not going to break camp with the team. That's already been announced by Dave Dombrowski. So don't expect to see him on opening day. Actually, you can count on not seeing him on opening day unless there was to be, knock on wood, like some injury to the rotation in spring training. And even then, they might go with somebody else. But the rotation is going to be Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez, Luzardo. That's pretty much locked down. Painter's going to be a depth guy, though. And at some point in the middle of the year, they may go to a 6-man rotation. At some point, guys are going to go down. And Andrew Painter's going to get his moment. And I'm not saying he's going to be Paul Skeens, right? I'm not saying he's going to take the league completely by storm and be this monster guy, because frankly, you probably won't get that many innings coming off Tommy John surgery and still recovering from all of that and stuff like that. But he is, don't let it be lost on you, an unbelievable pitching prospect that could be a maybe Zach Wheeler caliber guy one day, maybe Aaron Nola caliber guy one day. And some people might say, hey, there's a big gap between those two names you just listed. There isn't really. There's gap in perception, but Aaron Nola is pretty darn good as well. Like Andrew Painter is the top of the rotation arm. You're going to see him this year. He's going to make an impact for the Philadelphia Phillies, a depth starting role, and we'll see how much that impact could carry over to a potential postseason. That's a long way away, but Andrew Painter is the first name to know. The next name to know that I want you to be aware of is Moises Chase, who's a starting pitcher who's been at the Double-A level. Now, he could very well also get a chance in a depth role to show what he can do on the mound. Now, this is a guy that you may not know a lot about because he's not Andrew Painter, but he's a young pitching prospect that the Philadelphia Phillies feel pretty good about it. He is their number 3 prospect in their system right now. 3 of the 4 top prospects for the Philadelphia Phillies are pitching prospects, and none of them are Griff McGarry or Mick Abel, which is kind of wild considering where we have been at in the past. But he's a guy at 21 years old, same age as Andrew Painter, turning 22 this year, that he could be ready for a chance. I would see him as more of maybe a long relief bullpen option, maybe a super like dire situation, depth rotation guy. Less likely that he makes a major impact at the major league level, but could he debut this year? He's probably the second most likely guy to debut this year in the prospects list behind Andrew Painter. Now, we will have to bring up another guy here that has already made his debut, but Michael Mercado is an interesting case. He's still on the prospects list because, frankly, he didn't get enough time in the majors last year to establish himself. So what could Michael Mercado be? The Phillies really like the guy. The problem is he's turning 26 this year. We were just talking about Andrew Painter and Moises Chase, who are going to turn 22 this year. So Mercado a little bit more age, but that may mean a little bit more veteran presence. He's going to be a rotation depth piece, and the Phillies may also look to use him out of the bullpen at some point. I had him when we went through our bullpen potential options a couple weeks ago, last week. I had Michael Mercado as a guy that is going to have the final spot in the bullpen right now for me. Now, I'd like to see the Phillies add a true bullpen arm to do that. But if you had to add somebody, that would be the kid that I'd take. And I use kid loosely because he's turning 26. That's a guy that's kind of starting to push into pitching prime already. And that's not a problem because he's probably not a long-term solution anywhere for the Philadelphia Phillies. But if he could be a depth piece this year, that's good news. He's already debuted. You're going to see Michael Mercado at the major league level again this year. Now, you might say, Connor, these have all been pitchers. What's going on with position players? Are there any guys that you could look at that are ready to come up as a position player? And the short answer is no. I mean, like, the next closest guy that's probably major league ready is Mick Abel. And that's a guy that is probably, I don't know, he was in AAA last year. He could debut as well. He could be another depth guy. You have Seth Johnson is a guy that could come up, and you could be looking at him as an opportunity for more depth. But like, as far as position players are concerned, Aiden Miller is probably still a year away, if not 2. I mean, I'm trying to think of who else. Justin Crawford is a couple years away. Yeah, I don't really know who else you'd have that would come up. By the way, Seth Johnson, who I mentioned before, another pitcher. You don't really have anybody that's at a position of need that's close enough. Brian Rincon is a shortstop prospect that could be a depth piece in the future if the Phillies decide to move on from a guy like Edmundo Sosa, but that's not for another couple of years that they'll have to decide what they're doing in the middle. Like, there just really isn't much outside of the pitching spots in the prospect list that have any intrigue to the Philadelphia Phillies this year. But there are some interesting names. So the names you want to know: Johnson, Painter, Abel's another one that you want to know. Moises Chase is one that you want to know as far as pitchers that could make impacts on the major league roster this year. Now, what I'm hearing, though, is 21. I mean, let's look at some of these younger guys, 26, 25, and those are on the older side. I mean, you're not really looking at too many guys that have this proven major league experience or like are proven minor league experience. Even these are young prospects mostly. Mercado and Johnson are the ones that are obviously the exceptions to that rule. But this is leading into the conversation that we're going to have coming up, because while the Phillies do have depth, it's rather unproven depth. And unproven depth is not as valuable as bringing in maybe a veteran that still has gas left in the tank. And boy, did the Philadelphia Phillies have their name connected to a very interesting veteran pitcher this week. Coming up next, I'm going to tell you who that is and why it could work, even though at face value, it doesn't seem to be a position of need, because we have forgotten about this old strategy that has popped up a time or two with the Philadelphia Phillies that they never really employed for all that long, but they may want to. And that's the six-man rotation. We'll talk about who could fill that spot out coming up next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about SelectQuote first, because in sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the World Series. That's what the Phils are trying to do. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. How awesome would that be? No medical exam required. That's a great part. And it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/locked-on. Go to SelectQuote.com/locked-on today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/locked-on. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. All right, so I can't believe in the year of our Lord 2025, I am having this conversation with this name surrounding this baseball team. But I'm having it, and that is because reports came out this week about a former NL East legend, a guy that's been around the bunch, and a guy that is kind of basically fallen off a cliff. But he is available. He is interested in still pitching, and that is why the Philadelphia Phillies went and checked out Max Scherzer earlier this week. Yes, that Max Scherzer. Yes, he still wants to pitch at the major league level. Yes, I know. He is like 4,000 years old. I believe he's actually 41 years old is the exact thing. We were just talking about 21-year-old guys. Go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Max Scherzer is like 20 years older than some of those prospects. That the difference between like Max Scherzer's age and Andrew Painter's age is almost old enough to be able to have a beer. That's crazy. But that is a legend in Max Scherzer that believes he still has gas in the tank. So what he did was he went out and he threw a little throwing session for some teams, and the Philadelphia Phillies were in attendance. Here was the list of teams that were in attendance: the Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, Blue Jays, Braves, Cubs, Red Sox, and of course, your Philadelphia Phillies were in attendance. Now, do I think it's likely that the Philadelphia Phillies sign Max Scherzer? Absolutely not. I don't think that this is going to, like, if you had money to bet on it, the odds would probably be plus 10,000, plus 7,000. It's not a likely scenario that Max Scherzer ends up in Phillies pinstripes because, frankly, their rotation's already set. We told you they got 5 guys. And then you've got to figure out what you're doing with Taijuan Walker. You have Andrew Painter as a depth option, Mercado as a depth option, Chase as a depth option, all those guys we ran through in the first segment. You have Joe Ross as a swingman out of the bullpen. You have made yourself pretty darn deep when it comes to pitching, starting pitching. Now, you can never have too much, and that's where this argument begins, right? There is no way to roll into a season with too much pitching. You've seen what the Dodgers have been doing. They've been adding and adding and adding to the rotation, and they have got guys that don't even fit into the rotation that are high-quality starting pitchers. And you know what they say? we'll figure it out because we're going to need you at some point. And if you want to be part of a great baseball team, well, you might have to take a lesser role for the time being until your opportunity comes, but you're willing to do that because this is LA and we're going to win. And that's kind of the same mindset that people should have about the Phillies, because the Phillies were the second best record in baseball last year, and they have been competitive in the postseason, and they have been competing for World Series. And while they don't have the kind of glow that the Dodgers have gained this offseason, the Philadelphia Phillies are a winning organization in a major market that's willing to pay their players and do things the right way. So people should be interested in playing for the Philadelphia Phillies is my point. Now, how would you make Max Scherzer work if you already have 5 men in the rotation and some depth figured out and have an idea of what the pecking order is of guys if dudes in the rotation start to go down? What would the Scherzer move even look like? Would he go to AAA? And the answer to that is probably not. That's why it's not likely that the Philadelphia Phillies sign him, because I don't know how Max Scherzer ends up on the major league roster. But we have brought up, hey, you've got 7 guys that seem to fit into your bullpen. Normally, you're going to carry 8 guys in the pen. That leaves an open spot. Now, I've been trying to fill that spot by making arguments for them re-signing Carlos Estevez or bringing in other free agent relievers, and the Phillies haven't done that yet. Now, they may still. I'm not saying they're not going to do that, but they have not made that move yet, and now that roster spot still tentatively remains open. Now, they could use that on some of the other prospects that we talked about and give them a spot in the bullpen for time to develop. That could work for the Philadelphia Phillies. Or what they could do is they could go to the 6-man rotation. I don't know why I said sixth there with the TH, but yes, 6 guys in the rotation. And what it would be, I imagine, if they were to sign Scherzer, would be Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez, Luzardo, and then Scherzer would be the 6th starter, and they would balance everything out. They give guys a little bit more rest. Now, here's where it gets tricky, right? Zach Wheeler has been very vocal. Zach Wheeler, who, by the way, we talked about in an episode either this week or last week. I don't know. The days all run together in the middle of the offseason. MLB Network had him as the #1 starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. The best pitcher on the face of the planet, according to MLB Network, is Zachary Wheeler. And he is a guy that's been adamant that he does not like extra rest. He wants to get into a routine. He wants to throw every 5th day. He wants to get his work in. That's what he's most comfortable with. He hates skipping days, extra rest, any of that stuff. And listen, everybody's different. So I get it. He's entitled to that opinion. And the Phillies would be very, very smart to listen to Zach Wheeler, being that he's the ace of their staff. And bringing in Max Scherzer to add him would create a 6-man rotation, and that would lead to probably Wheeler being a little bit upset. Also, do you want to take away starts from the rest of those guys who are dominant for a old starting pitcher that you might say, well, I don't know what this guy has left in the tank. Max Scherzer, I don't know if he's going to be worth bringing in or giving a spot to in the rotation, questioning what Zach Wheeler wants to do. I don't see it likely as an option for the Philadelphia Phillies, but the Phillies were at that tryout for a reason. They were watching Max Scherzer throw. It wasn't like they accidentally sent a guy there and they're like, oh, wow, Scherzer throwing? I guess we'll watch. Oh, I happened to be passing by and Max Scherzer's throwing a bullpen. That's not what happened. The Philadelphia Phillies made a definitive effort to be there to watch Max Scherzer throw, and it only seems to make sense for one thing, which would be adding to depth in the rotation. And I've said, you can never have too much pitching. I get it. And what the Dodgers are doing, they're kind of creating this blueprint of how you should go about adding that pitching. It's just sign everybody and figure out where they fit later. And maybe the Philadelphia Phillies are saying, hey, guys, it's time to get snappy. It's time for us to fix our approach to this. It's time for us to try and enter the arms race with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And maybe Max Scherzer is the guy to do that. But I don't know what his it's a signing for the name, right? Not necessarily a signing for the talent. And I don't love that in a starting role, but as a depth piece, I don't hate it. So is there a world where I could see Max Scherzer signing with the Phillies and then ending up going to Reading and playing, or Lehigh and playing, and I don't know, pitching in the minors I don't think so, because some of those other teams I named would have Max Scherzer on the back, like at the back end of their rotations. They have pitching questions, and Scherzer would help them figure that out at the major league level. So why would he take that dude can do whatever he wants, basically. Why would he take a position with a team that's going to stash him in the minor leagues for later? He's already won World Series. I don't really know exactly what the draw of coming to Philadelphia is for Max Scherzer unless you put him in the starting rotation. So bottom line, it doesn't seem likely. But if you think, wow, you're just making stuff up because it's the middle of the offseason, the Philadelphia Phillies would not have been at that tryout if they did not have some kind of defined interest in Max Scherzer. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to pull the trigger on it. It doesn't mean if they did pull the trigger on it, they would have the highest bid or have the best fit or anything. It's just something that tells you, hey, while they're done, quote unquote, making major moves this offseason, it seems like they're not done exploring every option. They're not done seeing how they can make this team better, how they can add to their chances to compete in what is looking like a more difficult National League by the day. And you got to turn every stone over, and that's what Max Scherzer is. He's probably just another stone to turn over and say, hey, nothing here. But it's something that the Phillies took a look at, and that's something that I'll never get mad at them for doing, is checking out their options. Again, not likely that Max Scherzer becomes a member of the Philadelphia Phillies, but how wild would that be? Speaking of wild, coming up next as we wrap up today's episode, we're going to talk about the Phillies' start to the season. I was just kind of scrolling through the schedule today, and I realized something. Their month of April could be brutal. So we'll look at how the Phillies would start their season and if that changes mentality on anything for you at all. We'll discuss that coming up as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, I want you guys to listen to me very carefully here because we have two of the biggest football games of the year coming up. And from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. I've been telling you this. I'm going to tell you again. Take that $5. Put it on the Eagles money line. They're going to win. They're going to go to the Super Bowl. You're going to get $300 in bonus bets as well. And that's going to be a great thing to be able to spend. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel has you covered. Now, obviously, I don't know that the Eagles are going to win. I think they're going to win. But if you like other bets, FanDuel has a billion of them for you. Parlays, props, teasers, futures, everything, money lines, spread. They've got it all. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's round out with this. How does this feel? The Philadelphia Phillies report to spring training, or at least the pitchers and catchers do, on February 12th. That is 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 days from where we sit right now, recording this on Saturday, January 25th. Yes, 18 days until the pop of the mitt is back in Clearwater, Florida. We are getting there, folks. Feels good. But then once they show up, you're going to have to wait for the rest of the roster and then all of spring training. And it's going to be a little bit of a tease and then a long break until they actually play meaningful baseball. It's a nice little whet your appetite type of situation. But the Phillies still have a while until they hit their opening day mark. Now, the Philadelphia Phillies are going to open their season this year on the road in Washington. And the dates for those games, they start that series, the 3-game set with Washington. Let me just go back to March here because I was in April. I believe it's the 27th. Yes, it is the 27th. March 27th when they will start their regular season in Washington against the Nationals. So we still got time to go. What is that? So it's January 25th, a little over 2 months to opening day. Not too bad there to go for the Philadelphia Phillies. We're making it, folks. Stay strong. I believe in you. But here's something that I noticed as I was scrolling through the games today, because I was kind of looking, hey, what games do I want to go to? What games might I want to travel for? All of this stuff that's fun to check out when you're looking out the window and there's ice and snow on the ground and you want to think about a warmer time. But the Phillies have a brutal start to their schedule. They do. So what I need everybody to start preparing themselves for is a potential slow start for the Philadelphia Phillies. It's nice to start in Washington against the Nationals. They get off to a hot start, win 2 out of 3 in that series. I can already tell you I'm going to predict the Phillies to win 2 out of 3 in that series. And then they head home and they welcome the Colorado Rockies. And that's easy, right? Great start to the season. You might say, Connor, where does this get hard? Their third series of the year, and the Los Angeles Dodgers come to town for 3. That's going to be nuts right off the rip. I'm going to make sure I am in the building for those. That is going to be wild to watch. And then you just travel to Atlanta to face the Braves, who are going to be ticked off with the way their season went last time. Then you're going to go to St. Louis and play the Cardinals, who kind of always seem to find ways to play tight games, even if they're not the best team. Then the Giants come to town, and the Giants are one of those weird teams that the Phillies never really play well against. You get a little reprieve with the Marlins, but then you head up to New York to see Juan Soto and the Mets for 3 games. Then you go to the Cubs for 3 games. The Cubs are going to stink and round out with the Nationals. But in the first, basically month of the season, you're going to play the Juan Soto Mets, who knocked you out of the postseason last year, the Atlanta Braves, who are going to be contenders for the NL East, and the Los Angeles Dodgers. That is crazy. And those series happen all within a 2.5-week period. So, yeah, the Phillies better be ready to roll when they hit the ground this season. They don't exactly have this walkthrough of a start, which means that there's going to be points of the schedule that seem easier later on in the season. I think probably their easiest month is going to be the month of June. June is a pretty simple month for the Philadelphia Phillies. They get a little bit tough at the end, but we'll do a full schedule breakdown a little bit later when we get closer to the games actually mattering. I'm just looking at it and I'm saying, well, this is not a year for the Philadelphia Phillies to have a slow start. This is not a year for the Philadelphia Phillies to come out and kind of slog around. And they didn't do that this past year. This past year, they hit the ground running, and rather it was the opposite. They were the greatest team on the face of the planet for the first 3 months of the season, and then they hit an absolute collapse. So I'd like to see, obviously, a much more balanced type of season from the Philadelphia Phillies, but there's not a lot of margin for error starting off this season if you want to start competing for the division again, or you want to compete for the best record in the National League again. So this is where spring training gets really important. This is where figuring out these position battles like center field or backup catcher or the bullpen responsibilities becomes super important, because you're not going to have the chance to play a bunch of awful, terrible teams to start the year and say, okay, we could try this against them, or we could try that against this other team. No, when you play the Dodgers and the Braves in 6 consecutive games, that is go time. And with less divisional games, playing the Braves and the Mets in the first month of the season, that could go a long way to deciding who ends up winning the National League East. So enjoy this time now, folks. Enjoy the ramp up to spring training. Enjoy spring training down there in Clearwater and watching those games that don't matter, because as soon as we get going in late March and early April, there's going to be a lot on the line for this Philadelphia Phillies team. When your expectation is 95 plus wins, right? When your goal is to win a division, when your partial goal, because I don't know how realistic it's going to be, but is to win the National League's highest seed. And then obviously you want to win the National League pennant and the World Series and all of that. But getting the 1 seed over the course of 162, you can't have any real slow stretches of the season, or you're going to be in major trouble, especially with some of the quality baseball teams that exist in the National League this year. So my point in bringing all of this up is the flow of the season for the Philadelphia Phillies is going to be, it's always different every year, but it's going to be heated fast. And if they build out a nice early lead, well, we're going to feel really good about this team starting. And if they fall behind the 8 ball, we probably shouldn't be too critical of them if they drop games to the Dodgers and the Braves to start off the season, because that's just, I don't know, it's early on in the season. There's a lot to figure out, but I know people will get on this team fast. So I know that there's going to be a very tumultuous fan reaction to the Philadelphia Phillies season this year either way. but that's going to be exacerbated by who you start your season against and the teams that you're going to play over the first couple series. So prepare for the mentality and the marathon and the everything stress-wise that's going to come with another major league season with these crazy expectations. But it's nice that we're starting to turn our attention to that, and it's right around the corner. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Remember, we got Mailbag Monday coming your way, so I'm going to put out another tweet from my own personal account at ConnorThomas975 and at Locked On Phillies at LO_Phillies on Twitter. So you can go ahead and leave your replies to those tweets, and we'll answer your questions on Mailbag Monday. I'll try and get to all of them. So as many questions as you guys want to ask, try and do one per person. But as many people get tweets in, I'll dedicate a whole episode to it if I have to, as long as they're good questions and interesting to me. So grab those responses, send them in a tweet, and reply to my tweets with those, and I will answer those questions on Monday. But that's all for today's episode. Please make sure, once again, you're rating and reviewing if you're consuming this in podcast form, subscribing to the YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Oh, and don't let me forget, tomorrow, the biggest football game of the year for Philadelphia. Go Birds. We're rooting for you. Check out Locked On Eagles. Would love to be mentioning a Super Bowl in passing next week on some episodes, but we will see how that plays out. So that's all for today's episode. I'll talk to you next time on the next Locked On Phillies.